Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has sharply criticized the United States over what he describes as a dramatic policy reversal on Russian oil as the ongoing conflict in the Middle East disrupts global energy markets and threatens supply routes across the world. His comments come at a time when the escalating war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel has caused severe disruption to maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow but extremely strategic waterway between Iran and Oman that carries around 20% of the world's oil supply. Shipping traffic has dropped dramatically as tankers avoid the region, triggering one of the most significant energy disruptions in modern history and pushing oil prices above $100 per barrel. Against this backdrop, Araghchi accused Washington of hypocrisy in its approach toward Russian oil exports. Abbas Araghchi said the U.S. spent months on bullying India into ending oil imports from Russia. After 2 weeks of war with Iran, White House is now begging the world, including India, to buy Russian crude. His remarks were posted on social media while referencing a report highlighting how geopolitical turmoil in the Persian Gulf has reshaped the global energy market. According to Tehran, Washington had previously pressured countries like India to reduce or halt purchases of Russian crude following the war in Ukraine. However, as oil supplies from the Middle East became uncertain due to the conflict with Iran, the United States reportedly softened its stance in order to stabilize energy markets. Araghchi also criticized European governments for supporting U.S. actions against Iran. Abbas Araghchi added that Europe believed backing an illegal war on Iran would secure American support against Russia, describing the position as pathetic. The criticism reflects a broader geopolitical divide as Tehran attempts to portray Western policy toward Russia and Iran as inconsistent and driven by political convenience rather than principles. The Middle East conflict has created a complicated chain reaction across global energy markets. Military confrontations, attacks on energy facilities, and warnings issued by Iran have significantly reduced tanker movement through the Strait of Hormuz. At one point, more than 150 ships reportedly anchored outside the strait to avoid the risk of attacks. The disruption has forced countries dependent on Middle Eastern energy to rapidly seek alternative suppliers. Among the biggest beneficiaries of the crisis has been Russia's oil sector. Before the conflict erupted, Russia had been facing declining oil revenues due to falling prices and sanctions pressure from Western countries. But as shipping routes through the Gulf became unreliable, demand for Russian crude surged among major Asian buyers searching for secure supplies. Industry estimates suggest Russia has been earning around $150 million per day in additional revenue due to higher oil prices and increased demand triggered by the crisis. Analysts say the Kremlin could ultimately gain billions of dollars in extra tax revenue from oil exports if the disruption continues. Financial projections suggest Moscow could receive billions in additional revenue in the coming months if oil prices remain elevated and supply from the Gulf remains constrained. The crisis has been particularly significant for India, which is the world's third largest importer of crude oil and heavily dependent on overseas energy supplies. India imports nearly 88% of its oil requirements, making it especially vulnerable to disruptions in international supply chains. A substantial portion of India's crude imports traditionally comes from Middle Eastern producers such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates. Much of that oil normally travels through the Strait of Hormuz. In recent months, roughly 2.5 to 2.7 million barrels of crude oil per day destined for India have passed through the strait, making the shipping lane central to India's energy security. But as tanker traffic slowed and supplies from the Gulf became uncertain, India began increasing imports of Russian oil to compensate for the potential shortfall. According to shipping data and industry reports, India's purchases of Russian crude have surged by about 50% in March, rising to approximately 1.5 million barrels per day, compared with about 1.04 million barrels per day in February. The sudden increase reflects New Delhi's effort to diversify its supply sources amid fears that the conflict could escalate further. In addition to rising imports from Russia, India reportedly purchased around 30 million barrels of Russian crude that had been stranded at sea after the United States issued a temporary waiver allowing deliveries of cargoes already loaded onto ships before sanctions restrictions took effect. The waiver was widely interpreted as a move by Washington to prevent a severe global energy shock. While the decision helped stabilize markets, it also fueled criticism from Iran, which portrayed the move as evidence that Western powers are willing to relax sanctions when it serves their economic interests. The broader global energy system is now under intense pressure. The Strait of Hormuz is widely considered the world's most important oil choke point. A prolonged disruption could significantly reduce the availability of oil and liquefied natural gas, pushing prices even higher and potentially triggering economic turbulence worldwide. Analysts have warned that if the blockade continues, the world could face one of the most severe energy supply disruptions in decades. Some estimates suggest that production shutdowns across Gulf countries could exceed 10 million barrels per day if tankers remain unable to access loading terminals. Several oil-producing nations in the region have already begun cutting production because tankers are not arriving to load crude. Instead, oil is being pumped into storage facilities that are quickly approaching capacity after days of limited shipping activity. At the same time, global energy markets remain highly volatile. Major financial institutions have raised forecasts for oil prices, warning that the market could face prolonged instability until the situation in the Persian Gulf stabilizes. Some analysts believe prices could approach $100 per barrel or higher if the Strait of Hormuz remains partially closed for an extended period. The crisis has also created diplomatic tensions across Asia, where governments are scrambling to secure fuel supplies. India has been among the most exposed to the disruption. Analysts warn that the country has relatively limited strategic petroleum reserves compared with other large economies and therefore relies heavily on stable supply chains from abroad. Much of India's liquefied petroleum gas and liquefied natural gas also comes from the Middle East, making the Strait of Hormuz essential not only for oil imports, but also for household cooking fuel, electricity generation, and fertilizer production. A prolonged closure could therefore affect multiple sectors of the Indian economy, including transportation, agriculture, and manufacturing. Despite these risks, Iranian officials have attempted to reassure India that its ships will continue to receive safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's ambassador to India emphasized the long-standing relationship between the two countries and highlighted shared interest in maintaining cooperation during the crisis. The Iranian envoy said, "We believe that Iran and India are friends. We have common interest and common faith." He also suggested that both governments were working together to maintain stable relations despite the broader regional conflict. The ambassador added, "For this reason, governments of India help us, and we should help the government of India." The statement indicates that Tehran may be attempting to avoid alienating major Asian energy buyers, even while tensions with Western countries escalate. Meanwhile, Indian authorities have moved to reassure citizens that the country's fuel supply remains stable despite the geopolitical turmoil. Government officials have emphasized that petrol and diesel supplies across the country remain adequate and that refineries are operating at full capacity. An official said no fuel dry situation has been reported. Authorities also warned fuel retailers against violating government guidelines during the crisis. The official said all the retail outlet dealers are directed to strictly follow the guidelines while dispensing fuel. Any violation will invite very strict action. Officials acknowledge that liquefied petroleum gas could become a concern if disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz persist. However, they stress that domestic consumers will continue receiving supplies. The official added the important point is whether we are able to supply LPG to the domestic consumers or not, and the answer is yes. For now, governments and energy markets around the world are closely monitoring developments in the Persian Gulf. The conflict between Iran, the United States, and Israel has demonstrated how quickly geopolitical tensions can disrupt global supply chains. The Strait of Hormuz crisis has not only driven oil prices higher, but has also reshaped trade flows, boosted Russian energy exports, and forced countries like India to rethink their energy security strategies. If the conflict continues, analysts warn that the world could face prolonged volatility in energy markets with consequences that could extend far beyond the Middle East.